Okay, excellent. I think we're about to get started. I know people will be continuing to come in for a little bit, and there'll be a little jostling around. But I want to welcome everybody here. It's very exciting to have a full room to talk about Venezuela, which is in the news a lot right now. My name is Tracy Mulm. I'm a member of the Anti-War Committee, one of the two groups that co-sponsored this event today. In the Anti-War Committee, we believe that U.S. intervention is something to fight against, that the U.S. has no right to tell other countries who should be in power, who should be the president. That the U.S. has no place to put sanctions on other countries and put the people of those countries in basically in poverty. And that is what the U.S. is doing in Venezuela right now. I'm going to hand it over to Kristen, who's going to talk a little bit about WHAM, the other group that co-sponsored this event.
Yeah, hi, my name is Kristen Dooley. I am Executive Director of Women Against Military Madness.
Hang on, man.
Okay, my name is...
Get back there.
Please.
Go fuck. Fascists, go home.
All right, everybody please sit down.
Fascists, go home.
Please sit down. Please
Fascists, go
sit
home.
down. Please sit down and This event is being held in a private place and we have been invited here. So please sit down and be prepared to treat each other respectfully. Please sit down and take your turn to talk. Do not talk now, we're just getting started. Please give us a chance to get started. My name is Kristen Dooley and please, will you please quiet down? People want to hear what's happening. Thank you. My name is Kristen Dooley. I'm with Women Against Military Madness. We are a long-time anti-war committee. We've been around for anti-war organization. We've been around for 37 years. And we also disagree with the U.S. government telling other people who should run their country, in deciding who should get rich and who should get poor, and in deciding who should be the president or who should be in power, and sending troops in to make decisions for citizens of other countries. We are absolutely and totally opposed to that and have been for years, and we will continue to do so, which is why we also oppose U.S. government involvement in Venezuela. Now, we've decided to hold this event today, and we are willing to have discussions with people who disagree with us, but I do want you to know this is a private building. It's owned by Dave Bickey, who is here somewhere, and we need to respect him and this place by being respectful to each other and taking our turns to talk. Our first speaker is going to be, our only speaker actually, is going to be Sarah. So we have some ground rules. First, if you have cell phones, please turn them off. We don't want them all going off. Bathrooms are out the door and to the right if you need them. We are also live streaming this event. If you do not want your picture or image to be shown in live streaming, please let Carla, our camera person, know, and she will make sure that you're not included in anything. She's not really going to take audience shots, but she just wants, if you definitely don't want to be shown, this will go up on our Facebook page and be available in the future. So let her know. Please, no interruptions. Let our speaker talk. Let other people talk. Finish their questions. Go on. We're going to have a question and answer issue after Sarah talks. And at that time, you will have an opportunity to ask questions. We'll probably limit your questions, we hope, to 1 minute. We'll call time from up here, and I hope the crowd helps us keep people to time. Just ask them to slow down or sit down and let's get going. We have, next I'm going to give it back to Tracy from the Anti-War Committee.
Thank you, Kristen. So, I get the honor of introducing Sarah. Now, many people have met Sarah because she's been around. She's been around for many years. Sarah Martin became active in WHAM during the U.S. Central American Wars. Many WHAMers went on exposure trips at that time and came back and helped mobilize opposition to U.S. intervention. She's very familiar with the war criminals Elliot Abrams and John Bolton, and is very alarmed to see them recycled and in charge of the U.S. orchestrated coup in Venezuela, the current one that she will no doubt talk about tonight. once again, we're called in the U.S. to organize and stand up against U.S. imperialism. And Sarah was lucky enough to go on a delegation to Venezuela just a few weeks ago, and she's going to tell us all about it.
Hi, I'm Sarah. Can you hear okay? Thanks everybody for coming. I know it's not about me. I know it's about everybody's concern about Venezuela and what the U.S. government is doing down there. And it is bad, and we need to do something about that. First, let me ask, how many people in this room were involved with, went down there on exposure trips during the 80s and fought the good fight for the countries of Central America? How many people did that?
I lived there during the 80s for 10 years.
All right, so a few
I
actually.
grew up there in
A
the
few
80s.
actually. You don't have to, you just have to raise your hand. You
Oh,
don't have to
sorry.
talk, that's all, that's fine.
Can we ask questions
No,
during the?
no. At the end you can, but not,
They were super clear.
Oh,
yeah.
I'm sorry, I didn't understand,
Yeah,
that's
you
why I
Okay.
asked.
No, I,
Oh, okay, thank
it would
you.
make me too nervous if you did it in the middle, okay, so.
I'll make you nervous?
But not yet. Okay. You know, all right, you all know, most of you know, what a critical time it is for all peace and justice loving people to stand up to the systematic U.S. aggression against Venezuela. And we must mobilize.
Venezuela.
Please speak quiet. Yeah.
Well, if you're gonna
We're gonna
pronounce the
ask-
name, it's pronounced Venezuela.
Okay. It's all hands on deck. There were 13 of us on this delegation. Anti-war activists from U.S. and Canada representing UNAC, United National Anti-War Coalition, the International Action Center, Vets for Peace, Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, the Canadian Peace Council, and 3 journalists, two from Popular Resistance, as well as Eva Bartlett, everybody know her, who has done some incredible, needed, and excellent reporting from Syria. This was organized by the U.S. Peace Council and Black Alliance for Peace and hosted by COSI, Committee for Solidarity, International Solidarity, which has been around since 1971 in Venezuela. We went to Caracas. We could only go to Caracas actually because we had so much to do in Caracas, and we were there for a limited time. Only that time got to be a little more than we had planned for. Caracas is a city of 6 million people. It's a big city. Now here's some background for this latest chapter to the destabilization of Venezuela. And to bring it under U.S. domination has been going on since 1998, when Hugo Chavez was swept into power in a landslide election after decades of struggle. If I speak too fast, let me know, okay. Decades of struggle by progressive movements. They threw out a regime which only benefited the rich, leaving the vast majority of Venezuelans in abject poverty. A new constitution was immediately written based on equality and human rights, which would lift the lives of all the people of the country. This was intolerable to U.S. imperialists. The idea that Venezuela would have the audacity to exercise its self-determination and sovereignty over the huge reserves, its huge reserves of oil and gold and other precious metals had to be ended. It was critical, of course, and it still is, to the U.S. for maintaining total control of the region. Since 1998, their accomplishments are impressive and important. Oh, listen to these now, and just think about our country. 50% of poverty has been eliminated, and extreme poverty has disappeared. A Cuban-style healthcare system has been built. You know,
Don't interrupt.
yeah, we'll have to ask you to leave if you
She's
can.
gonna have to leave.
Okay, good.
She just moved
Okay.
2 years ago here.
Okay.
I just
It has been built with clinics.
Okay,
All right.
She's gonna.
Has been built with clinics on every few blocks. Illiteracy has been eradicated. Universities are free.
That is insupportable.
Gas and the metro are free. Since 2016, now get this one. This is I think the most astounding. Since 2016, 2.5 million low-income houses have been built in Venezuela. I'll say that again. 2.5 million low-income houses have been built in Venezuela. Now, when I came home, I think the headline in the Star Tribune that day was, homelessness has gone up 10% in Minnesota this year. So, I mean, what's wrong with this picture, right? Well, we know what's wrong with this picture. Illiteracy has been eradicated. Universities are free. Gas and the metro are free. The Maduro administration has provided hundreds of millions of computers, 100 millions or hundreds of millions of computers and textbooks to students across the country. Venezuela ranks 6th in the world in terms of enrollment in primary education, as it has increased its coverage of secondary education to 73% of the population. There have also been gains in civil rights of historically oppressed sectors of Venezuelan society, women, Afro-Indigenous people, and the LGBTQ community. The labor laws are among the most progressive in the world. Not surprisingly, a recent poll showed over 85% of Venezuelans approve of the continued drive towards socialism. Now, this has been accomplished. These incredible gains have been accomplished in spite of everything U.S. imperialists have thrown at them in what is really a 20-year ongoing war on Venezuela. One of the first attempts, we all know, was the 2002 coup attempt against Chavez and his government, which failed because he had the support of the military and because hundreds of thousands of people filled the street calling for his return. Bush, Obama, and Trump have all imposed sanctions. But today the sanctions are considered worse than on Cuba or Iran, with the noose tightening every day. The U.S. uses all manner of financial weapons to wage economic warfare and to steal billions of their money, of their dollars. Under pressure from Trump, the UK government has refused to release over $1 billion in Venezuelan gold reserves in the UK. Sanctions have been placed on the Venezuelan state oil company, blocking nearly $7 billion in assets. Let's see here. With its U.S. subsidiary Citgo, and cutting the country off from an estimated $12 billion in profits this year. Make no mistake, this economic war is taking a toll because Venezuela is unable to use its wealth. I mean, it's a very wealthy country. But the people in government continue to stand firm and in unity and are finding ways to lessen the effects and actually to not roll back any of the social gains made. It's quite impressive. Since Trump's appointment of Elliott, I want an appropriate response, Elliott Abrams, yes, and John Bolton, the vicious architects of war in Central America, the aggression by the U.S. has escalated, of course. A couple of months ago, Juan Guaido, a politician from a small right-wing party who was trained and backed by the U.S., he's made in the U.S., declared himself president. Now, there's no constitutional basis for this. Nonetheless, the U.S., of course, this was the U.S.'s idea, went along with it, but they also got the so-called Lima Group, which is 5 countries in South America, in the EU, 50 countries in all went along with this farce. Their fantasy was that the military would defect and turn on Maduro. With a few sorry exceptions, this has not happened, and the 200,000 members of the military, the National Guard, the police, and the 1 million members of the neighborhood militias, so, think about intervention, stand firmly ready to defend their country and president. 50 countries signed on, but 150 countries did not sign on. Although the U.S. says all options are on the table, even the Lima Group, which is made up of the likes of Colombia and Brazil, two governments that have newly turned to the right, they say no intervention. They understand what a military debacle that would be and what a bloodbath that would be. But probably what they care mostly about is the progressive movements in that country would turn out, well, not that they're with them now, but they'd be out of office in a nanosecond. Second here. So we came at a historic but dangerous and a very important time. At a time of ramped up U.S. aggression against the people and the government of Venezuela. Our intention, of course, was to bring a message of solidarity to Venezuela and the people, and also to learn to see the effects of U.S. economic firsthand, U.S. economic and political war on Venezuela, and to see how the Venezuelans are doing and how they're resisting. Also, to be able, with our first-hand eyewitnesses' accounts, to counteract the horrendous lies and misinformation in virtually all the mainstream corporate media. And also so that when your family and friends who are confused because of this awful coverage begin to ask you questions, you can say Sarah says, all right? That should do it. Of course, the media is lockstep with the Trump administration, beating the drums of regime change and intervention. And last night there was a conference call of people from the delegation, and actually the woman from WILF had, we probably all thought of this, but probably the basic answer to give to anybody who is confused about this is just to say, what is the record of the media in our country? And you can go back to, Yugoslavia, Afghanistan, Iraq. You just run through the countries, and most people of goodwill will begin to think, oh yeah, that's probably right. This is probably a bad deal. We were scheduled to be there from March 10th to the 15th, but that changed. I and several others had tickets on American Airlines. On the day I was supposed to fly out of Miami, American Airlines stopped flying into Caracas because the pilots were scared of the unrest. Now, there's no unrest except what the U.S. provokes. And actually, a lot of that unrest was coming from the U.S. Embassy, of which the diplomats just got kicked out because what they were doing was plotting the overthrow and plotting all kind of mischief in Venezuela and trying to bribe generals and anything they could think of. With a few sorry exceptions, all of that failed, and so now the embassy diplomats are out of the country. We arrived when the country was in the middle of an almost total blackout. A U.S. engineered attack on the center of the electrical system at the Guri hydroelectric dam. The attack had three parts: a cyber attack on the computer or the brain, and an electromagnetic assault on the power lines. And once the system was up and running, fires in two substations. This was an attempt to get the people to blame the government for the blackout and rise up against their government. But the people saw through it and pulled together. Without electricity, there was, of course, no running water. The metro stopped. We saw all this. The metro, although our hotel had a generator, so buildings that had generators were able to continue to function. The metro stopped. Buses were kept running, but the lines were very long. And there, of course, no elevators, no cable cars. ATM machines didn't work. Refrigerators didn't work. Maduro called off school and work. And it took 7 days to restore full power. This happened again yesterday or the day before, but I think the power's been restored now. No, still not. Okay. Okay, still not restored. During those days, the government and local community councils and collectivos, as they're called, distributed water and food. Priority was given to hospitals and schools. I asked one of our young hosts who lives with her family what it was like, and she said, actually, they got out their board games. She lives with her grandparents. They got out board games, including has anybody seen this? A Trump version of Monopoly? No. Maybe, I should have looked for that. Okay. And neighbors, cooked together on grills and that kind of thing. Unlike the pilots thought, the people were calm. They worked together, helping each other. There was no looting. No looting. It became very obvious that Maduro and the government were in charge. The people, whereas it was very obvious that Guaido, who said he was the president, was in charge of nothing. And even worse, wraps himself in U.S. intervention, even calling for a military intervention, a traitorous thing, obviously. Maduro's clearly on the rise, and Guaido is fading into oblivion. Yay. Right, yeah. I mentioned community councils and communes. A quick word about those. Today, tens of thousands of communal councils exist, forms of local self-government established by workers and other oppressed people to run the daily affairs of their neighborhood. Actually, the militias come out of these too. As the Bolivarian process has deepened over the years, the communal councils have been consolidated into communes, which bring communal councils together. It's a little bit complicated system to meet the need, but they're there to meet the needs of the people. And they apply for money to the government and get funded. Some communes focus on the production of food, others on cultural work, yet all represent the same thing, workers having control over their own lives. Today there are thousands of communes across Venezuela, and the process to build them is ongoing. Somebody pointed out, it's sort of like the Paris communes. We visited several government ministries and communities. We had lots of meetings. What we saw and learned are the effects of the draconian U.S. sanctions and economic war, but at the same time, the determination and the unity of the people to protect their independence, self-determination, and their government. Second here. One of the ministries we went to was the Ministry of Urban Agriculture, and actually an urban garden close to the office too. Up until recently, 80%, because they were a wealthy country, they could import food, medicines, anything they needed, but the U.S. has cut off money, of course, and frozen money. Sanctions have made it harder not only to import food, but to get the parts for distribution, like tires and truck parts and all that kind of stuff. So it's become critical to achieve some kind of food sovereignty, and it's become a priority. And actually, Maduro got an idea when he was in New York City, and he was inspired by the urban gardening projects he saw there. And when he came back, he established, imagine this, an urban agriculture ministry. Now those poor gardens in New York City are on their own, right? They don't have much government funding, but here they do. And there are many models: rooftop, backyards, 2 to 400 acre plots run by organized communities. Because this is scientific to do this kind of stuff, of course, they're helped by technicians from Cuba. I think they said North Korea, certainly Korea, but I think they may have said North Korea, or she may have, and Vietnam, who have the scientific knowledge of developing sustainable agriculture. They are 100% organic. 2012 seed laws outlawed GMOs, and they are now increased, but seeds are hard to get of course, because of the sanctions, they have a hard time getting seeds, so they're developing new ones too. They work particularly with the youth, and these gardens were especially important to providing for hospitals and schools during the blackouts. By the end of this year, they anticipate that 25% of the nation's foods will come from these urban gardens, and the goal is for 50% in 3 years. Yeah, it is impressive. They have also built 250 fish tanks, urban fishing, and families are encouraged to raise rabbits. It's an incredibly easy source of protein. They're clean, and of course there's a never-ending supply. Also, they raise chickens, but unfortunately chickens need a certain kind of feed, and that's hard to get because of the sanctions. But they're working on alternative food sources for them, as they are for pigs. Another very important way food is provided are the clap boxes. Maduro led the creation of local committees of supplies and productions, or CLAP, and every month, or 2 weeks to a month, 6 million boxes are given out to low-income families. That means 2/3 of the population is being subsidized with food. Each has a supply of essentials, including rice, wheat, flour, corn flour, dried milk, and beans, and they cost hardly anything. We also met with the Ministry of Health. Now, as I said, Chavez revolutionized the system, and as people had access to medical care, life expectancy climbed to 74 years of age. Good news for me. He developed 13,000 popular neighborhood clinics, 555 centers for more complicated care, and 260 hospitals for the sickest. They trained 18,000 community doctors. He built 15 x-ray centers and 52 neonatal centers. Interesting, we hear about refugees going from Venezuela to, well, those numbers are really inflated, and it's a much more complicated thing. And one thing, which is just the opposite, is Colombian women who are near the border often come across to have deliveries because they're free. Prevention is emphasized, but the extreme sanctions are taking their toll, and the availability of medicines has fallen drastically. In 2015, there were 58 drug labs. I think they were all probably, transnational companies. But because of the financial uncertainty caused by the economic war, they all fled. Now there are only 37. This led to an 86% shortage of essential meds, especially those needed for the leading causes of illness, for heart cancer and dialysis. Venezuela tried to buy from India and Turkey, but the U.S. threatened sanctions. But Russia is doing what it can. As with the food supply, there is a move to achieve pharmaceutical sovereignty. U.S. sanctions make this difficult because hard currency from oil sales is needed to build the pharmaceutical labs and to get the precursors. And the Venezuelans cannot get to their money in the Bank of London. The good news, though, is China, and more good news, is China, India, and Cuba are helping to build vaccination labs. And this past weekend, maybe you saw it in the news, Maduro visited one of 5 automated drug warehouses, which will be able to distribute hypoglycemic, hypertensive, and analgesics or pain meds, among others, to the neighborhood clinics throughout the country. While there, he also announced a new program called Pharmaceutical Engine, which will produce drugs with substitute ingredients with the help of Cuba, Russia, India, China, and now even the World Health Organization. He also announced a plan to develop a plan to fix the prices of drugs as well as to subsidize them for the poor. So you can see how whatever we throw at them, they don't find their way around it because they're too harsh. But they certainly do what they can, and it's quite amazing. Now, we had an opportunity to visit some communities, and we went to Katia, which is a barrio in the western part of Caracas, which has a population of over 1 million people. Before Chavez, it was desperately poor. It wasn't even on the map because there were no public services. Now the community has been transformed, is thriving, and is vibrant. We saw the housing, schools, and clinics which have been built. We visited fields of coffee as well as one of their many community gardens and greenhouses. Last year, they grew 17 tons of produce. We saw a new facility in a reclaimed oil company building, which is beginning to raise rabbits. We asked one of the young women, because one of the things you hear, one of the things you're going to have when you're struggling with your family and your friends is they're all starving. And we certainly didn't see any evidence of that. Saw no homelessness, and everybody looked like but those clap boxes, there's just no question they have enough to eat. But we asked a young woman who worked at the urban garden, and we said, we hear this is what they tell us on the media. What do you think? And she laughed, pointed at herself and said, oh, we need a diet. All the presidents we spoke to are proud of their barrio and their accomplishments and have a deep commitment to the Bolivarian Revolution. Katia is also 100% pro-government, and Maduro is known kind of as the heart of the revolution. The level of political understanding and commitment among the people is deep and happens in many ways and places, including an amazing weekly 5-hour TV show. It goes from 8 till 1. It is hosted by the President of the Constituent Assembly. It is the most popular TV program in the country, the most popular TV program in the country. Held in different places around the country every week. This one was outside the presidential palace, so we got to go. It's an incredible political education. He was very funny, and he had 3 boards. He had 80 index cards on 3 boards, each with a different event of the week. There was the bad news board, there was the good news board, and there was the fake news board. And he discussed each one, often with great humor. Much skewering of Guaido, of course, and Rubio, and Bolton, and Abrams. And Guaido was considered a joke and a fake by most of the people. Lots of singing, there were political and revolutionary songs. We heard them again in the march, so interspersed with very clever videos. He frequently held up a handwritten piece of paper which said in English, always loyal, never a traitor. We were each introduced, so they introduced us, we were in the second row and they had to stand up, and so the nation saw us. And after that, came up to us wherever we were to have their pictures taken and to talk about their commitment to what they're doing and to welcome us there. And that obviously, that was probably the most important part of most important thing that we accomplished was being there. For them to know that there's a movement, and look at this room, there is a movement in this country who is fighting from the belly of the beast. Let's see. Now, a real highlight of our trip, of course, was the meeting with, well, not of course, that probably was Maduro, but another real highlight was a meeting with the Minister of the Electoral Commission, which runs all the elections and referendums in the country. It's one of 5 ministries, actually, and the minister is a dynamic, heroic woman who comes out of the women's movement. The right to vote is in the Constitution. I do not believe, is it? Our government teacher back there, the right to vote is not in the Constitution, is it? Yeah. For over 20 years, she has been, because of this, you know, they have established an incredible voting system, electoral system. And for 20 years, she has been doing this, and it's internationally recognized as one of the fairest, freest, most transparent and secure electoral systems in the world, with incredible safeguards every step of the process. It's virtually impossible to have voter fraud, and monitors including Jimmy Carter have said this is true. When she came to office 20 years ago, 25% of people, all those people in Katia, over 18 weren't registered. So they made a thorough search in malls, neighborhoods, street corners, and now all but 3.8% aren't registered. Compare that to our sorry system, which works to disenfranchise people. She was successful in getting a law passed which requires every political party on the ballot to have can't be more than, there have to be at least 40% and not more than 60 of either men or women. So, and transgender candidates register, of course, as their preference. Because of the political times and the aggressiveness of some of the far-right opposition, she and her staff faced ongoing threats, but they continue their work. Now, she wanted to go to Geneva to defend the integrity of the last election, which is, of course, something that is under attack. But she couldn't go because the U.S. has sanctioned her, and Switzerland shamefully goes along with these sanctions. Now, that we were able to meet with Maduro and his son and his wife. It was quite a meeting. It was an incredible meeting. He talked about the history of Venezuela's relationship with the U.S. for 200 years. He said, just to make it short, it has been a struggle from 1826, a struggle between both, go like Bolivar and Maduro, go like this. And now it's a struggle between capitalism and socialism for the future of humanity. He says he'd like to talk to Trump, but will never give up their independence and sovereignty. His foreign minister, Jorge Ariaza, spoke with Bolton, but we know that didn't go so well. At one point, or toward the end of the meeting, he looked at his messages and read one from Bolton. Well, it wasn't a message, it was something Bolton had said. And said, well, this is pretty mild. He must have had a Valium. He's been to the U.S. and talked about going to Little Italy and Chinatown in New York City. He almost signed with the LA Dodgers. Who knew that?
No.
When he was told the bus drivers union in Boston was paying for a bus to go to the March 30th march in Washington, he said he wished he could drive the bus because he is, after all, he was a bus driver before he got into politics through his union. He talked about the importance of international solidarity and agreed to once again send a message to the March 30th march. Let's see here. He did that on February 23rd when there were the International Days of Action of Hands Off Venezuela. His foreign minister, who actually went on, his deputy foreign minister, who was with us a lot, who had to leave New York, of course, was at the Wall Street action, and he texted Maduro during that, on the 23rd, and got him, and Maduro was driving his car, so he held it up and did a selfie video thanking everybody and his solidarity. So I told him about the anti-war committee demonstration, which I didn't fudge this at all. You actually were doing it at the very moment that we were there, and in front of Klobuchar's office. And when they had the press conference after, he tweeted it to his millions of followers. So anti-war committee is internationally known, Maduro supporters, which is the important thing, right? And after that meeting, we stopped by an occupation just outside the presidential palace. This has been going on for 2 weeks to protect the president and palace in the event of an attack on it. And they are they know what's happening, and they know that the U.S. is going for broke here, and that it could be very ugly. So there are these hundreds of people that are in the tent to protect the palace. They're well organized, and they take their shifts, unions, community councils, all kind of community groups. We happen to be there with the oil workers, and Joe Lamardo, one of the people on our delegation, gave him the president, who gave a really fiery speech, hug afterwards, and the guy said, and you know, we're armed. So they know the score. They know that what might be required, and they're ready to do it. They're ready to defend, by any means necessary, the revolution. On Saturday, we attended it's a weekly pro-government, pro-Bolivarian revolution march. I think there were at least 100,000 people there. People representing all sectors of the country, unions, collectivas, ecological pensioners, LGBT collectivas, disabled, women, student, neighborhood unions. It was a sea of red and flags as far as the eye could see. And people were really joyful and exuberant. And they just come off that blackout, so of course they were glad about that. But they were singing and dancing, and it's a time, they know this is their work. They know, they go to work every day and they deal with the blackout, and yet they know how important it is to be on the streets every Saturday. And it's like a 3-hour commitment that they do. So, but they do it because they know the importance of this. But it's also time to be with friends and also and to celebrate the fact that that imperialist plot of the blackout had failed. A couple of our people went to an opposition rally, which was very small and didn't really happen. There were about 30 people there, and they talked to them, and what they said to them is the reason they do not like what's going on is because they can't buy stuff like they used to. There's no opportunity, and they want to get rich and go to the U.S. Me versus us mentality. There were apparently more police than marchers there, and most of the police were women because they found that they can de-escalate situations better than men if there's a provocation. We also visited a shanty town, or rather rode on a cable car to the top. Maduro was inspired by a ride he took in Bolivia in a cable car connecting two mountain villages and saw how the time would be cut down for people. So he came home and began a program of installing them from city centers to shanty towns, which are in the hills. What was a long walk up and down to shop, to go to school or work, now takes minutes. It also integrates the barrios into the city. And rather than tearing down the homes, they are being improved so that the character of the communities will be preserved. On the way up, we saw one of the many 5-story vertical gyms built around the country. In response to a period of horrific violence in 2014, as well as to some gang violence, and to provide opportunities for youth, these centers were built both for the services they offer and to provide peace and respect, or to promote that. And they've worked. Crime is down in these communities. They serve all ages. They have a preschool, meeting rooms, and we ask in the opposition schedule meetings, and they said yes. They have spaces for they just got a new space for fencing, interestingly. But they have boxing, kickball, a floor for arts in the theater, and a cafe. And when they find kids that are really, or people that are talented, they do kind of groom them and get them scholarships, so it serves that too. Now Venezuela is on the front line, right? Their struggle is our struggle. Every blow they deal to our government helps us in our struggles here, and vice versa. And we must mobilize. Only when the people are in motion will we be able to put a brake on imperialism, and it must be stopped in Venezuela. President Maduro is right. The future of humanity depends on it. And certainly, immediately, the future of Nicaragua and what's the other country? Cuba. Cuba depends on it too, so it's all hands on deck, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, this weekend there's a U.S. hands-off Venezuela and no to NATO march in Washington. And let me tell you, there's a very direct connection between NATO and Venezuela. Colombia is now a partner member of NATO, even though it is pretty far from the North Atlantic, right? And last week, when the right-wing president of Brazil, Bolsonaro, was in town, there was talk of, that's even farther from the North Atlantic, of them joining NATO. NATO will be in Washington to celebrate its 70th reunion next week. But they will also be planning, and what they do at these meetings is plan their next wars, right? And so Venezuela will be at the top of their agenda. You can bet on that. It's not a good thing. Now, Penny and Carol are both going. Raise your hands, Penny and Carol. They're going. All right. They're going. They're going to represent us. And,
One guy, everything that you have said is a lie. It's disrespectful that you're using my flag from my country. Shut up, and I'm from Venezuela.
Fascists go home! 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 Fascists! Fascists go home. Fascists go home.
And I'm sorry. You must leave. You must leave. I'm sorry. Let's let Sarah finish.
And actually, that's pretty tame for the opposition. They have done some pretty,
They'll shoot you.
what they do has been pretty awful. And that violence they talked about in 2014, they set up the opposition, including Juan Guaido, who had, or didn't have, but he was in the leadership of that, blocked off streets and actually lots of people were killed, and they burned Afro-Venezuelans. So this is pretty tame, actually, compared to what the opposition can be like there. All right, let's see. And impact, okay, but that's not the end, that's not the end.
You promised this, so we already threw you out once. We already threw you out once. And you promised this, so that you would be quiet. Good, then go.
And then this,
No, you don't get, no, you promised. You promised. You are breaking your promise. Get out. You are not waiting for the Q&A time.
Get her out.
Out.
Fascists.
Afuera.
Fascists go home. Fascists go home. Fascists go home. Fascists go home. We don't want you here.
we almost got this done.
Your promise. Get her out.
The last thing is,
You have to leave.
for those,
You have to leave. You have to leave.
for those of you,
Leave.
But can you hear me?
Hands off Venezuela! 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 Hands off Venezuela!
Get her out. Throw her out.
when the people of Venezuela is under attack, what do we do?
Stand up, fight back!
When Venezuela is under attack, what do we do?
Stand up, fight back!
When Venezuela is under attack, what do we do?
Stand up, fight back!
When Venezuela is under attack, what do we do?
Stand up, fight back!
When Venezuela is under attack, what do we do?
Stand up, fight back!
Cuba is under attack.
All right.
Stand up, fight
Cuba
back.
is under attack. What do we do?
Stand up, fight back!
When Cuba is under attack, what do we do?
Stand up, fight back!
When Cuba is under attack, what do we do?
Stand up, fight back!
All right. So, just when we did good there, we got almost through it. So there's the march in Washington, right, on Saturday. But there's also a march and a rally here in Minneapolis at Hiawatha and Lake. Yeah, Minnehaha.
I'm prone to go to the wrong place.
Yeah, Minnehaha Lake. I think I would have gone to the right place. Well, it's just across it's just under the bridge. So anyway, it is really important that we are all there. This is a command performance. Everything, if the Venezuelans are out there every Saturday, even though they are dealing with these sanctions and economic war, it is the least we can do, right? We have to be there. We have to answer every call to be out in the streets or make calls or whatever it is. So be sure you signed up back there too so we can get to you. So that's my report.
So we're going to have a few announcements before we get to the Q&A. I want people to know that this is not the first time that the Anti-War Committee, or WHAM, have been part of controversial issues. We have been working around Palestine for a long time. I also want people to know that in this room, we have a lot of differing opinions, right? But we organized this event to have Sarah report back. If you are so threatened by Sarah, you should leave now. We would like to get through our announcements respectfully. We would like to do question and answers respectfully and actually have people who have questions. We have a full room even without controversial question. And so we are going to ask people to stick to 1 minute. We will call on you, and we will ask you to end at a minute so that we can actually get to everybody's questions. So first, we're going to start by going through announcements because there are a lot of things going on.
Okay, first thing is Saturday, March 30th, as Sarah has mentioned, that is this Saturday, 1:30 p.m. at Lake Street, Minneapolis Avenue. Be a part of a visible anti-war presence with signs and banners. And very quickly.
Next up, we've got Break the Science, Yes to Peace, and No to NATO. It's actually on the back, so conveniently located. This one's happening on Thursday, April 4th at the state capitol. Please join us there.
And then on April 5th at Mount Olive Church, which is at 3045 Chicago Avenue, April 5th. At what time? 6 to 8 p.m. This is a really cool thing. It's a beating guns into tools. So there's actually a group that comes with a gun and they beat it down and they make garden tools out of it. So please come to that.
Then coming up is WHAM's annual meeting. They've got Winona the Leduc coming in, so it's going to be really cool. This is happening on Saturday, April 6th. 10 a.m. is brunch, 10:25 the program begins, and that is actually a punctual time. So be there on time at Spirit of St. Stephen's Catholic Church. You can find these at the back table.
And then fundraiser brunch. Help send Tracy Mom to Venezuela. That's on Sunday, April 7th, 10 a.m. at 3137 South 44th Avenue. I have been to these fundraisers. The food is great. The people are fun. Please come out for that.
And then the following day, Monday, April 8th, is Wham's Second Monday Movie Presents. It'll be the movie Enemies of Peace here, so you know the location. Join us then.
And then on April 24th, which is a Wednesday from 5 to 6 p.m., it's the 20th anniversary of the Bridge Vigil. Can you believe it? We've been doing that for 20 years. So we're going to be at the bridge because we never miss a Wednesday. We haven't in 20 years. And then after that, we're going to go to St. Albert the Great Church, have a potluck and a program. And then
on Friday, April 26th, from 7 to 8 p.m., there is dinner and conversation with Alice Rothschild, who is talking about Jewish Americans, Germany, Heartbreak and Hope in Israel, Palestine. That's happening at the Kenwood Isles building. And you can find this on the back table.
And then Alice Rothschild, will also be speaking at St. Stephen Lutheran Church, 8400 France Avenue in Bloomington on Saturday, April 27th, 9:30 a.m. Refreshments, 10 a.m. presentation and discussion. And I think we have copies of all those flyers back there. And we also, because we spent money on fundraising and making the flyers and stuff, we're going to send buckets around. Please give as much as you can. If we have things left over, we will buy other things and do other events. So, yes. Oh, also, on the back table, there are a couple actions you can take right now. There is a petition to ban nuclear weapons. If you have not signed it, please make a point of signing it. And then we also have postcards, which I'll probably get because I forgot to bring them in. You can sign a postcard to our senators asking them to support the end of nuclear weapons. And now, Trace, I'm going to hand over to you.
Okay, that is how you do rapid fire upcoming events. Let's give it up for Sarah. Okay, and now the promised question and answer, and I'm going to start with Dave in the front for being fast.
I want to say, as a member of the National Board of Directors of Veterans for Peace, our president, Jerry Cotton, and Dan Shea from my fellow Board of Directors member were there with you at Maduro. And Dan Shea took his dog tag out. He had his Vietnam dog tag, but then he took the dog tags that said Vets for Peace on one side, and then the other side it said End War is Forever. And he handed it to Maduro, and Maduro put the dog tags on. As far as I know, he still has a dog tag. But anyway, we are in total solidarity with non-intervention, which means hands off Venezuela, right? So we're all on board with that, and we know that all this stuff leading up to this, the power outages, you're looking for a false flag. We've been here before. Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya. We've been here before. The CIA is pretty damn obvious, and this is an obvious attempt a coup and a regime change.
That's right. And one more story about Dan. Is it O'Shea or Shea? O'Shea?
Dan Shea.
Dan Shea. We had several press conferences, and at the first one, he stood up and declared himself President of the United States.
I support that.
We believe it does. How has the government dealt with the new conditions brought about by like increased inflation and the sanctions and all of the negative consequences?
Well, I told you some of them, but what happens, of course, is, I mean, how they're dealing with the effects of it. But every time, they do figure out ways, and then the U.S. it's just this horrible game of the U.S. and slapping something else on. Hyperinflation actually has dropped considerably. It's down to 53% from 150 just last week. So that has improved. So, but it's an ongoing struggle, and it's also about a black market, and it's about hoarding stuff, and it's just the tools of the opposition in the U.S. are kind of unending. But
thank you.
Does somebody else have a?
Nope. So the green shirt in the back. Yeah. Yep.
Oh, is it true that from U.S. reports that Cuba is the end game of this whole conflict, coup in Venezuela?
Well, I don't know if it's the end game. It's certainly part of the game, but I think Venezuela is, in and of itself, is pretty important because of the oil and because of the example, and because of they're right there, their geographic location. So certainly Cuba is in the crosshairs too, as is Nicaragua. We've seen what's happening there too. So, but that's just my answer.
Oh yeah, you hang on to it, Sarah.
Yeah, I was wondering if you spoke to anybody there, not only Maduro, but anybody else that you might have met about anything that Russia's doing there. I know they have some troops, but I think it's a small number, like 100. And I did hear Trump say today, Russia's got to get out of Venezuela. So, and also China, did they speak, to what they're doing there exactly? Are they giving them economic aid, and are they there? I don't know if there are any what the Chinese presence is, but are they there as some kind of a buffer?
They are giving aid and loans and that kind of thing, and I think China is helping. Both of them are helping with the pharmaceutical thing. And it is true. I think that with just this last week, right? Some Russian troops, but
right.
And I think they have a really sophisticated anti-missile system that maybe is right. Is that right? Is it in Russian? Okay. So Russia and China are really important to the defense of. They weren't there for Libya, but they were there for Syria, and they they're there for Venezuela now. So that's.
Yeah, I would say that kind of seems to represent a different commitment than they've presented in the past.
So I have a question. Well, I'll work up to my question. First, you mentioned that Guaido was far right. Guaido is a Democrat socialist. You mentioned that the Lima Group is 5 countries. It's 12, including Canada, which is definitely leftist. You mentioned that there were... It
isn't anymore. It's quite
You mentioned that there were... Okay, I've listened to you for an hour. May I have my minute? Okay, that was part of my minute. You mentioned that that there were millions of colectivos. Every group that has looked at this will tell you that there's about 40,000 of them. If you want accurate information about what colectivos do, there's a very good article on Wikipedia. You mentioned that the population was resoundingly behind Maduro. Every single survey, and there's been at least 3 a month from 3 different countries, shows that 80 to 90% of the country is hugely behind Guaido. You mentioned that Guaido was asking for intervention. Guaido has not called for Article 187 of the Constitution. You mentioned the cyber attack on Guri.
Okay.
Guri is analog. Guri is analog. It is not a dam that can be cyber attacked. So my question is, what, you didn't say a single thing that was true. What are your sources? Where do you get this information?
We got a good question here.
All right.
So are you gonna answer what are your sources?
Oh, right, well, okay,
Where
the
do you get
sources,
this information?
what I recommend people to read is, Orinoco Tribune is one.
Which is owned by the government. State
Venezuela
propaganda.
Analysis is another one.
State
I just
propaganda,
heard about
owned by
one
the
last
government.
night, you're now interrupting. Mission Verdad is another one. Go to Fight Back, go back to, is that, Max Blumenthal on, Gray Zone, look for Ava Bartlett's stuff, go to Fight Back News and read everything that's up there, particularly Sean Orr stuff. So, a few sources.
State propaganda.
I listened to Max Blumenthal on the 0 Hour on 950, and he had a lot to say. I can't remember everything he said, but one of the things he was talking about is the very wealthy in Caracas that are, one woman, and Marie was her first name, and I can't remember her last name, but she was very disruptive and she's very violent. So you cannot, when there's that kind of disparity anywhere, there's going to be difficulties. And I can't say how much I detest how wealthy people want to have it their way all the time. They need to give up.
And I think that's one of the real accomplishments of Venezuela is that the disparity has been lessened and that poverty and opportunity have improved.
You in the very back?
Yes, thank you. I want to start saying that I am anti-war. I support movements that are anti-war.
Can you speak a little louder?
Sure. I support groups that are against the war. I'm Venezuela. I'm wearing a shirt that says "Made in Venezuela," but now I'm American. And I want to say that we don't want a war. Venezuelans don't want a war. You know, I have to send every month more than $1,000 to my family because otherwise they cannot survive. My father with Parkinson can't get medications, not because of the sanctions. Let me be clear. It's been 15 years of me sending medications from the US, from Canada, from Spain, because the government has not been able to provide medications, nor food, not security to any person in the country. So I just want to say that we're not here to fight you guys. But I think that there is a lot of misunderstanding on the information, and it bothers me. 5 seconds. It bothers me that no Venezuelans are speaking, and we are here trying to be part of it, and we get upset because a lot of the information that we hear from our people and when we go to the country is totally contrary to what you're reporting. So I just want to make sure that you guys open up a little bit your ears because, sure, thank you for listening.
Yeah, I just want to share my little bit story, and like this is an issue.
Speak louder.
This is an issue like this really getting tension around the world, and I'm from Guatemala, and I wasn't born when the United States invaded Guatemala, about United Fruit Company. I know it wasn't about oil, but about food, because even like we have like 6 months of winter here, all the food comes from Central America, South America, so this is an economic problem that roots why the war is going on. So, but I think we have to stand up against the war. I think we're, like I said, like Guatemala speak like 23 languages. And I didn't learn about when I was like 70s, 80s, I was like 10 years old. I didn't know that the guerrillas and military, poor and rich, fighting each other. And Soviet too, Russia and United States. Remember the United States invaded Guatemala. So I think I'm against the war. We stand with Maduro. I think we're struggling to build a new system, a fair system, but not the richest or the poorest. Just share all the nature that we have, which is economically. Thank you. I appreciate it.
All right. Hi. I'm from Venezuela. I've been in the U.S. for 38 years. So I left before any of this changed hands. A couple things is a couple of observations. My family's still back home, and I am very much connected with my home country as well as here. A couple of things is, as I echo what the gentleman here is saying, there's a lot of misinformation, and I see that the emotions are running rampant, and there's a lot going on. I've been going back and forth every 2 years. I was there in 2016, I was there in 2017. We held the marches in June, I was there in November, I was there about 10 days ago. And, for example, you mentioned that the marches were, 30 people were the opposition and millions were the other. That's not accurate, because I was there.
They were there.
I'm just saying, I was there. So there are miles of people. So I'm trying to paint a picture as to what the government propaganda is saying. I don't know exactly where you went. I know you went to Katia, I don't know if you went to hospitals, but I urge you to go to a Misión Vivienda and check the infrastructure of those buildings.
Thank you.
That was last Saturday, that there were very small opposition marches and huge pro-government. That's the truth. And that's the reality. Maybe I know there have been big opposition, yeah, there have been, there's no question, but not anymore.
I disagree, but that's why we're here, I guess.
Pat?
Well, I would just like to comment between the two of you that when we have demonstrations here, there's very few anti-people to those demonstrations, which could also be true of the demonstrations that you were talking about. That you go to your own demonstrations and you feel solidarity, and you should not say that there isn't something else going on in the country because you didn't see it.
Very true.
Yeah, hi. I have two questions. One is Venezuela able to export oil because of the sanctions? Are they still able to export oil to other countries?
I think it's way down. Does somebody know what those numbers are?
The
It's way down.
production has dropped from 4 million to 1 million, but that drop occurred before.
So it's affected by the sanctions.
Oh, yeah.
And then the second question I have.
Citgo's been taken over by
Oh.
the U.S.
I didn't know. And then the second question I
Citgo
have.
doesn't export.
I have a friend of mine from Ecuador. I work with him, and he told me he goes to the country, visits. He says there's a lot of refugees from Venezuela. A lot of refugees from Venezuela. I don't know if that's true or the degree or so.
There are some, somewhere I have it here, those numbers are very inflated by the propaganda machine, and a lot of it has to do with just going back and forth across the border too. So, and there's certainly people that leave for economic reasons too, but.
Ken in the back, Ken?
Thank you.
No, there was a guy behind you.
Yeah.
Oh, you got one there?
Yeah, you.
That's okay.
I'm from Venezuela too, and it's good for you guys to know that what happened in Venezuela is a humanitarian issue. We don't want war. We don't want that. We don't want invasion. We don't want anything related to, people dying because of freedom. That's the problem. We don't have freedom. I have my whole family is back home, and with my heart and my hands, I'm telling you, I don't need to lie for any. I don't support any system. I'm a completely independent guy. I'm not a righty, I'm not a lefty. I'm a guy that work to help my family. That's it. That's the situation with most of us here. We left because we had the opportunity to come over here and study and do what we do to try to help our families.
Thank you for finishing up.
I'm come from a poor family, so that's why I'm telling you this. I'm come from a very, very poor family.
Well, I think that the accomplishments and the fact that poverty has been cut in half and eliminated and all this housing has been built, I think the the numbers speak for themselves. So it's certainly a government that it means to serve the people.
You need to be quiet.
Yes, please.
So, hi, I'm from Venezuela as well. I grew up in Katia, as you mentioned. The only conflict that I see, that I feel being here is like, I don't think it's fair for a group of people that do not know my country and my culture to tell me what's going on there. I mean, I appreciate you going there and bringing this information, but I don't think it's fair to put our testimony and what we have to say like in a second place, like it's not important, because I saw people here trying to talk, trying to say something, and they were kicked out. And I understand that maybe that was not the way to do it, but what I'm trying to say is, if you want to really help Venezuela, creating a spaces to talk, like it's happening right now, is a good idea. But just coming here and telling me what's happening there when I still have all my family there, and they live in Katia, and I can tell you, that reality that you saw is not 100% true. And that's the only thing I wanted to say. It's good to have an ideology, and I don't support war either. I am not gonna say that the United States is 100% perfect, but I can tell you something. What is happening in Venezuela is not good, and it's not just because Maduro is the good guy and Guaido is just like the villain. There is a lot of things. There's a huge gray area, and that's it.
So we want to actually have some questions, because I think people want to actually ask questions. And we have several people who have raised their hands, including Kent in the back, and Autumn over here. So I'm going to start with Kent in the back.
Could you give some understanding about the class differences between the people that support the Chavismo in Venezuela and the people that are represented by the disruptors here? Like, I'm trying to understand, you know, these people seem to think that they have the only opinion here. And I see vast demonstrations in Venezuela saying it's the opposite. And could you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And not only is it a class issue, but it's also a racial issue too. And most of the opposition marches, you'll see mostly white people and black and brown and the others. So it's true. But the majority of the people in the country are black and brown, and we're very poor and working class too. So yeah, that's absolutely right. What you're seeing here is a manifestation of the.
Yeah, back there. Somebody asked for sources. I wanted to point out that the Wall Street Journal published an article, U.S. push to oust Venezuela's Maduro marks first shot in plan to reshape Latin America. And it referred to John Bolton's reference to a troika of terror being Venezuela, Nicaragua, and Cuba. So in other words, this is a plan by the U.S. government. It isn't that Venezuela did anything wrong. You know, this is all planned out. It's like the plan for the Middle East before that with Iraq and the 7 countries. So the fact that this came out in the Wall Street Journal really surprised me. But then about 10 days later, President Trump himself said this stuff orally. So this, you know, if you want to know why the U.S. is doing what it's doing, the Wall Street Journal itself gives the plan.
That's
I have a question about immigration. Just a quick question.
Several people. Autumn had her hand up long before you did.
Just a quick question.
No. We have a stack for a reason.
Wait your turn, man.
So, have you on the stack.
So, I know you spoke about like certain industries that were being developed, certain, you know, various arenas of advancement. Did you, by chance, get to learn anything about like food sovereignty? Like I heard that, you know, like workers were able to seize like abandoned factories and use them to like produce animal feed to like bolster the country's food sovereignty. Can you speak to any of that?
Yeah, that's about as much as I know too. That must be the thing about how they're developing new seeds, is they've taken over. Yes, because U.S. companies left at the time the oil prices went down and the sanctions started. They decided that this wasn't good. Their businesses were in jeopardy, so plants left, and many of them have been taken over by workers, and also either worker run or run by the government. But again, the sanctions really interfere with all this, because the ability to get the stuff that you need to make in the factories is because of the money not being available. So, but that's right, that's happening.
Thank you, Sarah.
I just want to say this is so very, very complicated, and as being a member of Veterans for Peace, I appreciate the people that showed patience and waited, because I wanted to hear both sides. And I appreciate your patience, and we have a hard time with this because we've seen our country do this dozens of times around the world. So we want to hear the other side and what you're thinking, and I hope you're next.
Thank you.
Thank you for that.
I just have a quick question. We all know that what we heard, that Venezuela is a great country. The government of Maduro is doing a lot for their people to feed them and to give them all their needs. However, we see yet mass exodus of over 12% of the population of a country that is 27 million people. And I say this because I'm from Venezuela, so I follow the news, and these are sources from the BBC, the Wall Street Journal, from many sources that provide this information. So I'm wondering if you were able to get some information about the people that are leaving, why are they leaving, why is there so much exodus from Venezuela, from the people from Venezuela?
Well, I think I did actually talk
Exactly
about
60
that.
seconds, thank you.
Yeah, and I mean, consider the source, BBC, but, and the Wall Street Journal got it right once, I guess.
Well, I'm sorry, I'm just
But
reading the sources that
what I
have.
said was that those, what I heard down there was that those numbers are greatly inflated, first of all, and that there's a lot of back and forth across the border for jobs and that kind of thing. And some people do leave, there's no question about that. A lot of people have come back. About 50% of the people that left have come back. And because healthcare is free, a lot Colombian women actually come across the border to have their babies. So that's.
Yeah, so my question is about, this is really about U.S. intervention, regardless of how well their country, regardless of how well or not well a country is doing. U.S. intervention in the past has just been terrible. When we say that we're helping a country, it seems like we rip it apart. So if the U.S. government gets their way, what would that look like? I mean,
and I completely agree with this gentleman on that opinion. I know, I'm sorry. I just want to say that it is true, and that's one of the difference. It's like we're trying for change because of what we're seeing in the last 20 years, that we have seen the same decation. And right now.
You're not going to.
Yeah, that's.
I know that I'm deviating for what you want to achieve.
But it's not your turn. It's not your turn.
But you're right. No, you're right. Vietnam, Iraq, all of it. Yeah. And
what time is it? Is it 20 after? Or people
8:22. 8:22.
People had it?
And that's true. We can do it. Oh, we're destroying ourselves, and we need the help.
I have no dog in this fight. I admire all of your anti-war efforts, especially the Veterans Group. I've donated money to them for years, okay? However, as an English teacher who insists on research, I heard no sources from you other than being ferried around by government people. And you brought up Palestine, a cause dear to my heart. I've lived in Islamic countries for 12 years. Would you allow Netanyahu to show you the Palestinian situation?
I thought you didn't have a dog in the fight.
Well, I didn't hear. Did you speak to the opposition? Did you speak to the opposition? Did you? Did you speak to any
I
of the...
didn't, but some of our members did.
So they went to the prisons, to the journalists who are imprisoned there.
Or to people like me who can go back.
Okay, wait,
I'm
no,
leaving.
don't take over,
leaving.
don't take over.
I think this is it. All right, thanks everybody for coming, and see you Saturday on the streets, and whenever, and
Thank you very much,
Thank you for
Sarah.
visiting my country. It's a beautiful country.
What do we do? Stand up, fight back!
Get out,
People of Venezuela are under